Well, hey y'all, welcome to the Virtual Applique Getaway, and we're going to do a session on how to locate placement and stitch a lapel monogram or design. We're going to use this amazing, beautifully crafted hoodie from Love That Cotton, one of our vendors. So when you get done watching the session, head on over to the Love That Cotton booth and check out their amazing stuff. This is the most amazingly soft cotton ever. But we're going to take a design from Dawn's Creative Appliques. That's their website, Creative Appliques. We're going to use their font and their monogram circle that's got this beautiful little seashell underneath. Okay, so a little applique involved, a little bit of monogramming involved, and then our major goal here is to learn placement on how to figure out where you put those jacket or t-shirt, sweatshirt kinds of logos. Okay? So that's what this session is mostly about. We're using Love That Cotton hoodie. We're using a Creative Appliques design and font. And then we are using some amazing stabilizer from MJ Sewing Supply. Some other supplies that you will need to be able to do this accurately and correctly is a great quilting ruler. I'm sure some of the vendors have some sort of clear rulers. I actually use two of them in both directions, and I'll show you how I do that in a little bit. Of course, you'll need your design merged in your software. I've already done that. I use Embroidery, so I just use a merge command, and I put my letters in my design with my monogram circle, and then I save it all and move it to the machine on my USB. So all of that's been done. That's not what this session is about. If you need help with that, you can find my Facebook group, PE 770 and 780 and 800 Brother Embroidery Newbies group. That's one of the main group I help in. It's the one I admin. And so we'll be glad to help you learn some of the other skills. There are other software groups available if you have different software, but that's not what this main session is about. Other supplies, of course, you'll need your hoodie. You'll need some applique fabric for the shell part, and I have chosen to use, show you this flower out of this whole piece of paisley looking stuff, because see how it's similarly shaped to the seashell, and so I'm going to place it very specifically on the spot once I get my placement stitch done. So you'll notice on the back, another supply that I'm using is some Heat and Bond Light or Wonder Under. I've already ironed it onto my spot, and we're going to peel the paper off. So now we're left with a shiny back. Okay, and when we get ready to iron that on, I have a little bitty craft iron that I'll use in the middle of stitching. We'll stop, the machine will stop between frames, and I'll iron this on so that it doesn't shift or move around while we put the decorative stitching on. Okay, you'll also need your stabilizer. I'm going to use, just because it's different, I have a bunch of samples that MJ Sewing Supply provided. I am going to use this 3-ounce cutaway. That's what I'm using for this particular project. If you watch the stabilization video that I made, I demo I show several different stabilizers, and I talk about how to use them in different projects. So if you haven't seen that session yet, make sure you catch that one and take a look. But if you need good stabilizer, I highly recommend MJ Sewing Supply. I will never order from Amazon again. I will always go get some here. She's actually here local to me in Omaha, but I didn't know that till last week. So I'm really excited to be able to use her products. Let's see, what else will we need? Oh, our other supply. is a disappearing ink fabric marker of some sort, blue or purple. You can use chalk if you want, but you'll need to mark places on your fabric. So make sure whatever you use, you will have the ability to rinse it out or it disappears and fades. All right? And I think that's about all the supplies other than your thread. I never use the colored threads that designs specify. I always pick my own. I'm going to use some of the same colors because these hoodies are going to sisters. So I'm going to use some of the same colors on both hoodies, but I'm using slightly different ones for part of the design on this one because she likes purple. So I used teal on Emily's, and I'm going to use purples on Kenzie's. All right? So holler at us in the Facebook group PE 770 and 780 and 800 Brother Embroidery Newbies, and we'll help you figure out whatever you're having trouble with. But here we go. All right, so one of the standard guide or rules is to place a design about 6 to 8 inches down from the shoulder seam. If you don't have a shoulder seam, like on a raglan, you get a shoulder seam by folding it and laying it flat. The shoulder line is that fold. So you can still use the 6 to 8 inches. Now that's for an adult, okay? So these are going on this design is going on a size 8. On Emily's, it's a size 6. You'll see that the center of her design from the shoulder down is about 5 inches. The center is right here in the middle of the W. So that's a lot of glare. Let's fix that. Is that better, y'all? There you go. So you'll see that the center of Emily's design is about 5 inches. So a smaller child, a size 6, you're going to want to go a little lower or higher, actually, less stitches or less inches but higher on the shirt. So it's 5 inches from shoulder to center. On Kenzie's, size 8, we're probably going to go just a little bit, like about a 5.5. And there are standard rules and guidelines, like I said, 6 to 8 inches down on an adult. However, look at shirts when you're out shopping. Look at collegiate wear. That's a really good way to tell where things are. Stick you a measuring tape in your pocket. I haul this one around with me all the time. My husband's always fussing at me because I'll pull it out at the drop of a hat. But put you a little tape measure in your pocket, and when you're out shopping, do some measurements. Just, browse and take a look and measure and see what you think looks good. Experiment on your own children or grandchildren to see what fits and looks good. There are standard guidelines, but those are just guidelines. You are able to make the choices when you are putting designs on clothing. So we're going to mark our centers by measuring down from the shoulder about 5.5 inches. I'm going to put a dot, and then I'm going to turn my ruler sideways, and I'm going to use the center seam of the zipper. The seam that attaches the zipper is going to be my mark. That's because, and some people will use the actual edge of the fabric. I use the seam because it's more pleasing to the eye. It sort of breaks your vision up when you're looking at something. That line sort of separates the rest of the garment. So if you use the edge of the garment, sometimes items in the lapel can look off-center. But if you use the seam to find your center, it's a little bit more pleasing to the eye. Again, use what works for you. So we're going to measure from the seam across to the closest point on the arm seam, okay? And we get about 5 1/4. So that means that we have 5 1/4 inches of stitchable space, okay? Our design is only about 4 1/2 inches wide, so we're not going to need all of it. That means we're going to find the center on this same line where our dot is from before. This gives us our up and down line, and now we're going to find our half mark. So half of 5 1/4 is going to be, I hate doing fraction math, it's going to be 2 1/2 is half of 5, and so then we're going to go over 1/8 more. So that'll be 2 1/2 and 1/8 more. So this is going to be true center right here. Okay? So I'm going to make a little line so I know which one is the right line we're working from. So they're in the same plane up and down, and then it's across. So we're going to mark that as our center, and then we're going to put our shirt aside, and we're going to do some work with our hoop. So I have stabilizer, I'm going to take and spray just a little spray. It's quilting basting spray. There are several brands and kinds. 505 is one of the most popular. Dritz has one in a yellow and red can. And then there's this, which smells really good, like grape jelly, that is Taylor Quilt Basting Spray. And then we're going to take, and this is heavier stabilizer than I usually use. I usually use about a 1.8 ounce weight, but I'm using this one because I want to try it. It's from MJ Sewing Supply, and so far the trials I've done with her supplies have been amazing. So I'm really pleased with how things are turning out, and I'm having to use less layers of stabilizer. So you'll see on my hoop, I have marked black lines that are just to the side of my ridges. The ridges are not center. You want to find center, and the way you do that is drop your needle and it'll make a little dot, and then you can draw your lines across to connect. I know my ridges this direction are center, but the up and down ones are not. Okay? When I say the vertical ones, okay? It's just to the side. I don't know why my light keeps going out. Okay. Alright. So we're going to take and put our markings on our stabilizer. I use the grid underneath on my quilting mat to help me line up and identify square. So I'm going to take my ruler and line it up beside my little ridges, and I'm going to draw my horizontal line. I've lined up my ruler with my little black Sharpie marker. And we draw another line. So now I have my center identified. I know that this is the center of my project. If I have my center marked on my stabilizer and I know the center of my project, then I can line the centers up and know that I have my design where it's supposed to go when I get done stitching. Okay, so on the hoodie, I don't want to stitch through the facing, so I'm going to fold that out as I lay the project down on the stabilizer. Okay, so I'm going to take and fold over. When you have straight lines, like in the jacket, the zipper is considered a straight line. So I'm going to use that. Turn this around where y'all can see that better. I'm going to use that as my guide. If you're doing this on a sweatshirt or a t-shirt or something that's not broken in the front, just iron you a center seam down the middle, and that's your straight line to go by. But I'm going to take and fold my straight line over on that center line. And I'm going to create another center line from the shoulder seam down. So to make sure it's straight, I'll take my ruler and find my purple dot. That is right here. It's hard to see through here. Let me make it a little darker. It's not coming through on the wrong end, I wonder. I just got a new light and apparently it doesn't want to work today. Here we go. Now I can see my line on both sides. So that's where I want to measure from. So we have about 3 inches to the edge of the zipper. I'm going to move the ruler down. Move the ruler down a little bit, and I make sure I'm at 3 inches. So I'm 3 inches here and 3 inches here. So that way I know I have a straight line, and that's where you can pin this. If you're unsure or not positive, you can hold on to things. But my purple dot, can you see that right here by my finger? I know it's tiny. Okay, but there's my purple dot. That's the center of my project. Let me do one thing. I'm going to flip this around for you so I can show you when I put it on the machine where the weight of the jacket goes. So I'm going to line up my dot that's center of my project, and I'm going to use the folded edge to come down here and line up with my black line on my hoop. I'm going to do the same thing with the top. It's a little challenging to get all of the pieces and parts with this hoodie laid out just right, but notice my left hand continues to hold my project where it belongs so nothing shifts out of place. Okay, once you get it in place, you can measure again to make sure this, you can feel underneath the edge, and when you go all the way down to the fabric, it's hard to see. We're at not quite 3 inches, so my fold is a little off. Let's fix that. There we go. Now we should be right at 3 inches, and we are. 1, 2, 3. That's the edge of the jacket. Okay. So that ensures that we're lined up and we're straight and that the design will stitch out properly. Then we press that down onto the sprayed adhesive and we begin to unfold the facing just a little, and very gently, without tugging or pulling on the knit fabric or the cotton fabric, it'll stretch. We press it down and into place. Okay? Some people do put their projects on poly mesh or no-show mesh, and then they hoop the entire project. That is a perfectly acceptable way to stabilize your projects. I just never could master that particular skill. So I learned to float. Floating or hooping your project still requires that you adequately stabilize your project. And so I'm going to start by pinning in several places all the way around my stitch area. I'm going to show you how to adjust your stitch area, because depending on how much space you wind up with on your lapel, your design might need to go down just a bit to give you a little bit of extra room. Or you may have mistaken how you placed your shirt and you need to move your design up a little bit. So I'll show you how to do that. But once we get it a little bit secure on the stabilizer, we're going to take and put this on the machine, and I'm going to run a basting stitch around the stitching area. If the basting stitch doesn't go where I want it to go, then I will adjust on my machine's touch screen using the features of my machine. Okay? So to look at your machine's touch screen, it will help you figure out the size. Different machines will show you in different places, but on my Innovis, it shows right here on the main screen. As I've loaded my design, it shows the size, and I can rotate or move my design as needed. Okay, so I have rotated it. When I load it, it comes up sideways, and I've turned it to go vertical, so that when I put it on the shirt, I have the hooped shirt the way I want it. Okay, so it makes things easier. Use your screen as needed. Just touch it to rotate or move it in whatever direction you decide. And maybe we'll see how those work in a minute. When you finish editing, this is what the screen looks like. And now we see we have about 8,800 stitches. It's going to take about 22 minutes to run. Not the best pictures, I'm sorry. There you go, that's a little better. Okay. I never use a spool end cap. I let the thread flow freely off my machine, and that prevents lots of nesting and knotting and problems. Okay, so we are going to take our hooped hoodie. This side goes on the machine. So now my machine looks like it's going to stitch my design upside down. So we're going to go to the edit screen, and I'm going to turn the design upside down. But I want to show you why I'm doing that. If I put this on the machine right side up, the jacket, all weight would be over here. That's going to put you at a much higher risk of bunching and weight falling and pulling on your stabilizer, shifting your design. You always want to make sure you account for the extra weight of your project, especially if it's a heavy hoodie, sweatshirt, towel, those kinds of things, blankets. They pull on your frame, on your hoop, and that will cause a lot of shifting and problems with your stitching. So I deliberately put my jacket on upside down so you would be able to see how to account for the weight of your project. So we're going to go back to the edit screen, and I'm going to rotate 90 and 90, and now my design is upside down. Let's see if I can see that. Showing a lighted screen is hard. Okay, See how it's upside down now? But it's going to stitch upside down because this is the hood and that's the bottom of the jacket. So this is absolutely correct. Okay? Okay, so let's take a look at where the basting box stitch and we'll decide if we need to move the design. So this is the jacket, the hood, okay? So our basting box is about 3 millimeters each direction off of the design. 3 millimeters is about that much space between the seam and the basting box. Do know that our design is rounded, so it's going to come this direction. It's not going to come up here anywhere around the arm stitching. So if you were worried about it, you could put your hoop back on the machine and move your design down a little bit and restitch your basting box. This is fine for me and my grandchild because I know the design is rounded and it's not going to come anywhere near that set of stitching. By the time it's stitched, it's going to come right down here. It won't be anywhere near that. Okay? It's a little bit further to the arm than some people might like because it's a tight fit here and it's not such a tight fit here. So I might move that over just a little bit to get it a little bit more centered. Using your basting box is a real help when you are trying to get placement just right. You don't have to stitch it. There is a command on most of the machines. This little box here, you can use this little box and it'll just go around for you. But we want the design to go right just a little bit. So I'm going to push the right arrow. My machine shows me how many tenths of an inch we're moving over. I'm going to go about 1/4 inch at 0.26. I think that'll be sufficient. It'll get it off of the seam of the arm and it'll move it over just a little bit toward my zipper. Okay? And I'll show you that basting box. Notice it kept it in the exact same spot, top and bottom, but it's moved it over about 1/4 of an inch. Notice when I'm putting my hands down here, I'm keeping my fingers close to the hoop frame, not down in the body of the hoop. My cutter does not work. So now we have 2 sets of basting boxes, but much more appropriately placed now. Okay? If you still want it more centered, you could move it over again as long as you're still having room in your hoop. This is good for our purposes and I'm happy to leave it just where it is. So I have my purple thread. Remember I said I'm using purples instead of teals on this project because of the applique fabric I'm going to use for the shell. So I've got my purple thread on the machine and I've got her threaded. I always start my designs, if I get to merge them, I always start stitching from the centers. So we're going to start with the monogram, not the frame and the shell. if you're appliquing a frame on first, you want that to go down first, but then start your stitching inside that frame. This is going to start with the W because there is no applique fabric, and we want the design to be stable from the inside out. And so that's why I always start my stitching, if I get to choose that, from the inside out. So we're done with the monogram, and so the next frame is going to be the shell that is going to stitch at the bottom middle of our design. So I just wanted to stop here a second because I want to share with you that I always clip my jump stitches when the machine stops. Sometimes I can clip them if they're far enough away from the needle while the machine's moving, but you want to be extremely cautious doing that. That's how people get their fingers stuck. So when the machine stops for thread changes, or if there's a big jump coming up, just hit your button and stop it so that you don't let the foot snag on your jump threads. Okay, so we're just going to stitch our placement for our applique shell. I'm going to leave my purple thread on because it's going to get covered up. So I have our little piece of applique fabric. Remember, I've already pre-ironed the the Heat and Bond Light on the back, so it's a little shiny and sticky. I'm going to loosen my hoop and slide this off where we can see it a little better. So I'm going to clip my stitches, move that thread out of my way, and I'm going to try to place this right about there. That looks like it's pretty centered. I'm going to carefully slide it back into place, lock my hoop down, and then we're going to stitch this piece of fabric in place. Slide this off the machine a little bit so we can trim it. I'm going to show you how I trim. I love these heritage snips from Amazon. I don't know if any of our vendors carry them, but if they don't, you can get them on Amazon. But if you want a vendor to carry them, let them know. These are amazing. They have the sharpest points, the tiniest points, and they get in the craziest of little positions. So I'm just going to trim around my shell really close. They are curved blades, so they help you not snag your fabric as you move around. And then I get really close and personal, trying to trim all these little places up. I think it's about time for me to order a new pair of heritage snips. The points aren't as sharp as they used to be. But I try to trim really close. So that none of this fabric sticks out from under my stitches. So now, get all that off. Now I'm going to show you my little craft iron that I use. So I'm just going to take my little handy dandy craft iron and press this down, melting my heat and bond light so my fabrics adhere together. That'll help prevent any shifting during the rest of the stitching. And then back to the machine we go. And now it's time to look at some thread colors. It's finishing up and I'm so excited to see it all done. I just wanted to mention that when you are stitching sometimes over, that's not a good place for that. Sometimes when you are stitching over other designs, you may need to use a pin or a chopstick or something near your presser foot to actually hold down. You could probably hear that really loud boom, 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 boom. That was just the density of the stitches against the needle and the project. It was banging a lot louder because it was dense and the top stitching was going over the satin stitching. So keep in mind that you do hear different sounds when your machine is working, but you need to learn to listen for those different sounds because sometimes they're bad and you need to be able to stop quickly. But let me get this off the machine and I'll show you how we'll clean her up. Alright, so she's off the machine, still hooped. I'm going to start on the back. I do trim my long jumps and loose threads. I trim them to about 1/4 to 1/2 inch. You don't want to clip them immediately next to your stabilizer. When you do clip them too close, you run the risk of your design coming unraveled. I'm also going to go around real quick the basting stitches, and I'm going to clip those every 3 to 4 inches, every 3 to 4 stitches. I do all my clipping and trimming from the back, and then I do all my clipping and trimming on the front. You can do either side first or second. But once we get the back done, we'll be able to flip it over and remove the basting stitches. If there are any long jumps that a finger can go through, if any of them are long enough the little kid's finger could slip through, I raise them up and trim them off, because little fingers will damage your project if left to snag on those little fingers. You want to trim all of the long loops off. Once we're done, we can flip her over. Now, some of you are probably wondering why I didn't use any soluble stabilizer on front, and it's just because this is a thin layer of cotton. There was nothing for the stitching to sink down in. If this had been a thick, fleecy sweatshirt or other thick project like toweling, where the stitches could sink down deep, then that would be a very good use of water-soluble stabilizer. But usually once you trim the back, all of these front stitches just pop right out. A couple of these are catching because it was 2 layers. Remember, we did 2 different places, so it's catching a little bit. So we just clean all of this up, and you can steam around your design to seal up the holes from the basting and the pinning, but you do not ever want to steam over your actual stitches. That will cause some fabric and or thread and or stabilizer shrinkage, resulting in puckers. So never, never, never steam your project. Steam around so that you can seal up the holes, but never, never, never steam the actual stitching. Okay, so now we have all of the stitching loose from around the basting, and I'm going to show you how I trim this out. I take my handy dandy rotary tool, and I have very carefully bunched up most of my project fabric, my hoodie, and I'm just going to make round cuts all the way around. Never cut these in squares. When you cut them in squares, I can guarantee you they'll pucker from the back, they'll wrinkle, they'll show through. You'll have lots of trouble with your stabilizer not laying down flat. You'll have sharp points to deal with, so always cut rounded corners on your projects if you can. But here we go. Here is Kenzie's finished hoodie. Didn't that turn out beautiful? I'm so excited. This is one of her Christmas presents from her Mimi. So she'll love it. So I've got a little trimming left to do here. Some of the basting stitches are stitched under the pink. So we'll get that trimmed out and cleaned up. But this is how you place a lapel on a garment, a lapel design on a garment. Okay? I hope this was helpful. I hope you had fun. Keep in mind that I highly recommend stabilizers from MJ Sewing Supply. I used a 3-ounce stabilizer for this, and it looks amazing, like totally. On Emily's, I used a 2.5-ounce stabilizer. It's a little bit lighter weight, but it still looks terrific, totally beautiful, and didn't have any trouble with either one of them stitching out. They do have some no-show mesh that you can get, but you can also ask them to send you swatch booklets of different stabilizers so that you can get a feel for what they feel like and use them. The design again is from Creative Appliques, and the hoodie is from Love That Cotton. I hope y'all had a blast.